we have to understand that there are some very, very good people out there speaking about information, experiences they've had that they do believe to be extraterrestrial. That, in fact, and I'm thinking now of a man I haven't met, but who is a wonderful gentleman from all accounts, a guy named Goode, and who's doing the Full Disclosure Project, and he and I are like hand in glove, supportive of many things, but some of the things he's recounting about slave trade and slave planets and things of this that he experienced because he was, as a 6 or 7 year old, I understand, taken into the military abduction program, like Dr. Bell. And I have no doubt he believed that those events were extraterrestrial. But I think that what I want people to understand is we have to be very careful about our assessment of what's out there in the universe based on people who have been in these programs who are, and I know that there was an executive at Gaia TV who was furious that I used this word, but who have been victims of this. And I don't think it's wrong to say if you're a 6 or 7 year old child and you're taken into a military abduction program and have stuff done to you, you've been a victim. I know that there are other people. I know Dr. Bell was a victim. Now, this is not to say that the person is a bad person or a wrong person. It's just to say that we have to look at what is being shared and understand that there could be information that is accurate, information that might have been scripted, information and experiences that have been had that have been programmable. So the holographic psychotronic systems that have been in existence since the 50s would allow for people, and have allowed for people, to have experiences that they 100% believe. Just as the man told me, people would believe that they were, if they had a conversation with their personal God, they'd pass a lie detector. They are sincere about what they're reporting. There is no, I'm not saying any deceit is in play. What I'm saying is that it would be very easy to deceive somebody who's a child or a young adult with these fearsome weapon systems and technologies that are in the hands of absolute psychopaths. I mean, true psychopaths in the covert programs. And I know who some of these folks are, and they will stop at nothing to see that people are convinced that there is a threat, as Ronald Reagan said at the United Nations, that we should unite against and fight, to unite the world around. And all I have to say is that if the future is that future, you might as well dig a hole and climb in it. So we better wake up and understand that the information that is out there has to get looked at from many perspectives. What's the origin of the experience? Was it deep, unacknowledged special access projects that hoaxed it? Is that person having an experience with an extraterrestrial, interstellar civilization, an entity from another dimension that's not extraterrestrial, which is also out there? A scripted program from the intelligence community using these very advanced technologies that have been in development for 70 or 80 years? What is it? And it's not, I'm not trying, you have to ask these questions. And you have to begin to understand that there is a capacity to use this sort of information in a way that would redound to whom? The military, industrial, gangbangster, global complex of fascists that are desperate to have World War III be interplanetary. Now, this is why when you start talking about this issue of false INW, indications and warnings, deceptive indication and warnings, false flag, it's a very deep hole to go down. And what I would encourage people to do is to question what part of this, what they are learning, seeing, has been programmed into our society, and many times innocently has been piggybacked on people. One more level of what I call this, so I've gone through the aircraft that are anti-gravity, the electromagnetic weapon systems, and now the human intelligence. There are a lot of people who have had actual ET contact experiences that, when that is known by the intelligence community, and I've had this confirmed to be by multiple independent corroborating sources, are then targeted by the intelligence community with a man-made abduction event to confuse them. And so that they don't know where did the ET event end and the man-made one start. Do you understand what I'm saying? That has been done because everything is tracked. Everything is tracked. When these events happen that are ET, the intelligence community absolutely knows it's happened anywhere on the planet, and they can come in with a special operations team and then victimize that person who's had contact with an ET with a man-made, hoaxed alien encounter. So it gets very complex, and I regret to inform you that this is not something that is new. It's been talked about actually since the 70s and 80s by various people, but it's been hushed up by the UFO subculture, hushed up by the intelligence community. And the reason for it is that people don't want their paradigms changed. I think a lot of it is people don't want their belief systems challenged. Go ahead.
So my question is, tonight you brought up Corey Goode and some around Gaia TV. And recently on your Telcon you had last month, you brought up the same topic around some of the information and being somewhat skeptical about some of the information coming out of that programming. With things like what William Tompkins is bringing up, the idea of Solar Warden and some of those other groups operating out in space, what things are you skeptical of, and what things are you in belief
He's
of?
asking, what am I skeptical of about things that have come out recently with Bill Tompkins and others? A lot. Okay, so here's the issue for me. You've got to have multiple points of corroboration, and the bigger the tale, the more the proof you got to have. Now, what I would say is that I believe these men are sharing what they believe to be true. I also know how easy it would be to provide information that is scripted about that, and that is seductive and interesting. But I'm very cautious about saying that there's dispositive evidence. The research, I mean, the volumes of research that I and other people have on this exist. Many people back in even the 80s have documented the military involvement with abductions. We now have an official with the Air Force counterintelligence confirming that. So there are certain things we can say we have confirmation of. There are other things that I wouldn't say it's impossible, because I don't think anything is impossible, but I also know how easy it would be, having gotten to know Dr. Fred Bell very well, and who had been in these deep intelligence programs and had been provided with information that was scripted to get him to say and do certain things, that I want to be cautious about it. So, and this is not about personalities. I don't want to get into this whole personality thing. And someone said, well, you know, it's not about that. I don't care about any of that. I care about people not assuming facts that aren't in evidence, but also being aware of the truth, that people who have been in those programs, deep intelligence programs that are in unacknowledged special access projects, often are given information that is not true so that they will convey it to others. And they are being used for that purpose. A great example of that is a man, it kind of broke my heart. There was anybody heard of a group called Blink 182? So back when they were a young group, there was a guy named Tom Delong that was following my work, and we met at their apex as a group, and they, I'd go on stage with them and things like that back in the early 2000s. And he has since been brought in, as you know, from the WikiLeaks by General McCaskill out of Wright-Patterson and some others who are feeding him disinformation about a threat so that it'll get to the young people, like the new movie Independence Day where they had the recruiting ad, from the Army, to get people to buy into this us versus them alienism. Now, I don't think Tom DeLong is in any way a bad person. I think he, however, has been used to do that by General McCaskill and others, as have many other folks. So now people could say, my information, I've been used. Though you can argue this forever. All I'm doing is tonight trying to share my understanding of things. And where I end is where I started. Even if everything that is being said that is of a terrifying nature of things going on out in space or with this ET group or another, the only survivable operative system is the CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind system, where based on the principles of nonviolence and universal peace, we have a rapprochement with these civilizations, we establish communication with them, we develop a civilization on our planet. I don't think that is peaceful and nonviolent and does not go out into space violently. I don't think the solution to this problem is more war or better space weapons to target ET objects or each other between Russia and the United States. I don't see that that's the solution. Bigger and better or more fearsome weapons targeting each other or other civilizations, this cannot be an answer. And I also then remind people that civilizations, if they had that clear intent and wanted to do something, it would be very easy to do. I mean, remember when we first detonated atomic weapons and this whole modern era of UFOs being seen all over the world, wherever there was an atomic weapons facility developing, both in the Soviet Union and America, Great Britain, France, everywhere. Well-documented disclosure project material. If they had wanted to just put a pause button on this civilization, they could have done it. They didn't. And by the way, at that point, we had what? Vacuum tubes? We didn't even have integrated circuits yet. We got those from studying ET materials, as fiber optics and other things. So I don't really see where's the beef here. Well, now, some people would say, well, they're just biding their time and they're going to get us in this sort of way later, and all kinds of paranoid fantasies. I'd say, well, if that's the truth, and here's what I'd say to anyone who has that belief system and that paradigm. You're entitled to it. I would ask that you, if you have personal knowledge of those civilizations and have access to them, that you set up a meeting between me and the senior people on our interplanetary ambassador team to resolve differences and go forward peacefully. I still don't think the answer is in saber-rattling, warmongering, and demonizing other racial species. That's alienism. One of the other concerns I have is that with many of these people, you'll hear that the ones that look Nordic, shall we say, I was talking to, I've spent 3 or 4 hours with Bill Tompkins, and the ones that kind of look like us, but are pretty, those are good ones. The ones that look some other way, those are bad ones. Isn't that interstellar racism? All right? It's just, take a step back. Aren't the good ones always the pretty blonde ones with the big breasts and the, no. Unfortunately, this is really true. You talk to, and then the others are, I find it appalling I mean, I really go, are we really going to stay on that cycle of taking racism and turning it into alienism and finding some way? Now, ultimately, as I said earlier, I cannot prove a negative. I can't prove there are no civilizations out there that are worse than we are, although it would be hard to find worse than human society right now. However, if there are, I still say the solution is contact, communication, conflict resolution within the construct of universal consciousness and universal peace. And so I prefer not to just get into an endless battle, because it's an argument that will never end. The only reason I brought it up at all is because I'm concerned that places like Gaia TV or Conscious Evolution could be given information out there that is being scripted and being provided unwittingly from these folks. I mean, and sincerely, that if it is true, let's say that the slave races are out there and the slave planets and the slave ships and all this is going on, that you hear in some of the accounts from Corey Goode and others. If that were true, and that then is put out by into the public domain to then millions and eventually billions of people, in the minds of most people out here on the street, that would justify interplanetary war. And so we have to be very careful. What I'm trying to say here is that we have a responsibility here to protect the human consciousness. I'm not saying to cover things up or just not disclose things that are true, but to ask the questions, who would benefit from that kind of Manichaean, good and bad alienism paradigm, and the demonization of one group and the exaltation of another ET group? Wouldn't that build into the same dynamic that on Earth has gotten us to the brink of Armageddon? And isn't there a better way of looking at this? Isn't there a different way, not better, different way, that could lead to a world of peace here and peace with humanity with these other civilizations? That's what I'm saying. And it is not at all to throw a wet blanket on anyone's parade. It's simply to say there's a responsibility here to look at it very carefully and understand that there are consequences to these kind of tales, and that we better be able to prove it. And even if you can, here's the solution. Now there, Corey Goode and I would agree 100%. And we agree, I think, I have never met the gentleman, I think on a lot we agree 100%. However, on some of the things that are being shared as factual secret space program activities that have no other real good points of corroboration, and which I know, given how he was in the military abduction programs and what they are capable of, some of the experiences he has had, I'm concerned, have been scripted and may not reflect anything actually out there in deep space. Because I have my own experiences out in deep space, and I'm not going to go too far into that here today, but I have a different understanding of it. And I also understand that the sort of folks, and this is a soul-searching issue for all of us, the sort of folks who would put into the consciousness, mind, and experience of various people what has been shared about the secret space program have had the ability for 60 years to do it in a way that would be very convincing but completely scripted. That's why I spent that whole section talking about the electromagnetic psychotronic radionic systems that were developed in the 50s. And this is also why I think that I'd rather be cautious about this. And my concern is that when you have rock stars and other people, and then millions of people who otherwise would be New Age, progressive, whatever, buying into a Manichaean black and white, us versus them, good and bad, they're just being brought into alienism. They're being brought into a paradigm that supports interplanetary war. And my question is always, who would benefit from that kind of information? Now, I'm not someone who says that if there are such, let's call them misguided and dangerous elements out in other star systems, that we would want to ignore them. But I just think that we would want to discuss them and characterize them and interact with them in a different way. And I know that the folks who have been in the military programs connected to Mr. Tompkins and others have an agenda. And I question that agenda has to do with the propagation of fear and the convincing of the public that there's an existential threat, as Dr. Ronald Reagan said at the UN, that would unite the world to fight. And the purpose of that is this aggregation of more power. Because right now you have different coalitions around the world. If there was a threat from outer space, then all those different conflicting coalitions, whether it be Russia or America or China, developed world, would come together, just like the movie Independence Day, to unite to fight the ETs, the aliens. And I think that having talked to so many folks who've been involved over decades in those operations and the extent to which they have the ability to make that happen, I approach this with extreme caution. And for that reason, I would ask other people that calmer heads need to prevail here. That my interest is a future that is marked by universal peace, not endless war. Now, if we stampede the public into all kinds of frightening information from the past or what we're seeing as the future, and that is then used the way 9/11 was used, or the way the Iraq weapons of mass destruction were used, or the Gulf of Tonkin were used, and I know that that's the plan, then we could end up with the mass panic in the public being utilized to aggregate more power around the militarists and the military-industrial complex and those uber elites who want to sit atop the world manipulating everyone in an us versus them worldview. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to say who this man was. There was the head of a religious organization back in the 90s, I believe, when I met with him. Very large global organization. And when we were talking about this, and this is a man who's dedicated his life to world peace and to enlightenment, as soon as he heard of the ET issue, he says, oh, and this is not someone in the cabal. This is a man on the street, sort of, but a big figure internationally. That'd be great, because if the public finds out about aliens, we can have world peace because we can unite everyone against a threat from out there. He went from A to B, like Ronald Reagan, like that. And this is a man otherwise of enormous enlightenment. I'm telling you, this is the danger. This is the thing that my wife and I talk about probably more than anything over the last 25 years about this issue, is me getting off the stage, because I don't want disclosure of this subject to then be used and hijacked for the purpose of saying, yes, there are ETs, but guess what? They're here to eat us for lunch, and now we have to have World War III. I don't want, see what I'm saying? I have to tell you, that's why I'm here tonight, because this is what keeps me awake at night. This is my biggest fear. My biggest fear is that disclosing this information gets hijacked and spun into this War of the Worlds, Independence Day kind of scenario, and that I would have forsaken my medical career and spent 26 years of my life and had very close friends murdered to add fire to interplanetary war? No. That's not, I don't want that to be what I'm working on. And as I see it, groups that are otherwise very dedicated with a view of a conscious, evolved world, or Gaia, an enlightened, awake planet, as a platform where so much of that, some of that information is then portraying various ET races as these horrific, torturing, slave trading, species. And I think to myself, wow, they've already got the warmongers. They could get the man on the street by hoaxing something. Now they're trying to co-opt even the progressive community. I'm being very blunt, and I know that I will get a lot of emails complaining. And it isn't about that. I mean, I've always had a policy to try to avoid talking about personalities. But I'm just deeply concerned that there is a juggernaut. And I think that we have to think about what are we doing to the world in the human consciousness when terrifying aspects of interstellar civilizations are presented as absolute fact, when there's the possibility there is this dark hand of the intelligence community that has scripted this and hoaxed it. What are those implications? They're huge. And I think there is a moral and ethical question here. And I will be honest with you, that's the only reason I'm doing this tonight. I think this is a matter of enormous moral and ethical concern that is not being discussed properly and fully. And I think we have to, I would rather stop everything I'm doing than to propel further disclosure if what it leads to is piggybacking onto disclosure, this fearsome new world order of interplanetary conflict and hatred. That is not what I've dedicated my life to. So that's my big concern. I'm being as honest, speaking from my heart as I can.